Welcome to another video from explainingcomputers.com. On the 13th of October 2026, Windows 10 Consumer Extended Security Updates, or ESUs, come to an end. And this means that all of us still running Windows 10 Home or Windows 10 Pro who enrolled for ESUs will no longer get security patches. Users of the Enterprise or Education versions of Windows 10 can still pay for ESUs until October 2028. And in February 2026, Microsoft announced further ESU availability for Windows 10 Enterprise 2016 LTSB. However, with nearly 72% of end users now running Windows 11 and 26% Windows 10, we should not expect consumer ESUs to be extended. In 4 months' time, all of us still running Windows 10 with consumer ESUs therefore need to make a more radical decision than we did in 2025. When consumer ESUs end, Microsoft's advice is to upgrade to Windows 11 if your computer supports it, or to buy a new device. This second option is hardly ideal for people with perfectly decent hardware that they want to keep on using, especially with current RAM and storage prices. And some people don't want to run Windows 11 even if their computer supports it. So, what are the alternatives for Windows 10 Home or Pro users? Well, a year ago I suggested these 10. But in October the consumer ESU option will disappear. And so, with 12 months of computing history under our belts, let's see how viable the others remain. Starting with doing nothing, over the past year AI has become extremely good at discovering security vulnerabilities. So, it's likely that after consumer ESUs end, many critical security flaws will be found in Windows 10 and exploited on unpatched machines. Given that Microsoft will still be supplying enterprise and education ESUs, it could decide to provide patches for these to Windows 10 Home and Pro. But relying on Microsoft to provide security updates that will officially have ended is hardly wise. Like it or not, running any operating system without security patches is becoming increasingly risky and is not advised. Secondly, you could choose to run Windows 10 offline. This option remains secure, but is likely to be impractical unless you have another computer for internet access. Thirdly, paid third-party security patches are a credible option. For example, for €24.95 plus taxes a year, you can buy a service called ZeroPatch from Across Security. This claims to provide Windows 10 with security patches and will be available for at least 4 more years. But if you choose this option, you're placing your trust in Windows security patches that don't come from Microsoft. A final option for retaining a secure version of Windows 10 is to migrate to a Windows 10 Enterprise Edition from the Long-Term Servicing Channel, or LTSC. For example, Windows 10 Enterprise LTSC 2019 is supported until January 9, 2029. However, migrating to it requires a reinstall, and there may be issues with newer hardware and software support. More fundamentally, whilst purchasing an activation key is pretty easy, the ISO file to install any version of Windows 10 Enterprise LTSC is only available via a Microsoft volume licensing account. To be clear, there is no legitimate public download source. So, unless you happen to have access to a Microsoft volume licensing account, migrating to Enterprise LTSC Windows 10 is risky. Whilst a lot of computers don't officially support Windows 11, it remains possible to do a clean Windows 11 install on almost any PC or laptop with a 64-bit processor and at least 4 GB of RAM. Most straightforwardly, the method using Rufus to create a bootable Windows 11 installation media does not require TPM 2.0, secure boot, or even a Microsoft account. And Rufus can now even strip out things like Copilot. As I checked in late May 2026, the Rufus method continues to work perfectly. Well, not quite perfectly, as you do end up with Windows 11 on your computer. But seriously, if you want to continue running Windows on hardware that does not officially support Windows 11, then this is a pretty good option. Do, however, be aware that whilst unsupported Windows 11 installations receive security updates, they do not get feature updates or updates to the next version. So, to get security updates long term, you'll have to perform a periodic hack or a clean Rufus install. For example, the current version of Windows 11, 25H2, will only receive security updates until October the 12th, 2027, after which action will be required to maintain security updates on unsupported hardware. Rather than maintaining a secure version of Windows, another option is to migrate to a Linux-based operating system. This could be a desktop Linux distribution such as Ubuntu, Linux Mint, or Zorin OS. However, it could also be FidoOS or Chrome OS Flex. These are based on Chromium OS, which is in turn based on Linux and is the basis of Chrome OS on Google Chromebooks. If all you need is access to the web and cloud applications, FidoOS or Chrome OS Flex are a great choice that are very easy to install. And FidoOS can even be set up with a local account. To run local applications, a full desktop Linux distro is a better alternative, and I've detailed the process of migrating to Linux in many videos, including Switching to Linux, a beginner's guide. And so here I'll stress just two things. Firstly, only some Linux distributions fully automate the entire setup process. So, if you want everything to work straight out of the box, including the automatic installation of all drivers and media codecs, you must choose a distro that will do this for you. Right now, in this category, I would suggest Zorin OS 18 if you want a Windows-like interface, or Ubuntu 26.04 if you are happy to embrace something a little bit different. One of my greatest frustrations is reading YouTube comments from people who tried Linux and gave up because they couldn't get everything to work. So, let me be really clear. If, in 2026, you need to mess about in a terminal or a driver manager to set things up, and this is something you do not want to do, then you have chosen the wrong distro. Secondly, regardless of which distro you choose, including Chrome OS Flex or FidoOS, never replace Windows with Linux until you have run it from a USB drive and tested that all your hardware is compatible. So, before you click install, check you have a working trackpad, Wi-Fi, audio, Bluetooth, and so on. This is really easy to do and will save you from replacing Windows with Linux and then having problems. Today, most Linux distros are highly compatible with most computers, but there are exceptions, so always test first. For some people, a major downside of Linux is that it cannot directly run Windows applications such as Microsoft Office or Photoshop. And this brings us to three hybrid options where Windows 10 is maintained in some form after ESU's end. Here, one option is to set up a dual boot with Linux and an offline install of Windows 10. This allows you to select either Linux or Windows on boot, so providing secure offline access to your existing Windows applications. Secondly, you could migrate to Linux and set up an offline Windows virtual machine to run your Windows software in a secure environment. I've covered this in several videos, including a recent episode on how to turn an existing Windows installation into a virtual machine. Finally, the other way around, you could continue to run Windows 10 but with a Linux virtual machine that you use for all online activities. And whilst this would not be entirely secure, it should be safer than continuing to go online in Windows 10 after ESU's end. Before we close, I thought you may be interested to know which option I'm personally going to choose. So here is my 2018 ASUS ZenBook UX330 UA laptop, which is currently running Windows 10 with Consumer ESUs. But before October, I'll be replacing Windows 10 with Ubuntu 2604, along with a Windows XP virtual machine for accessing older Windows software such as pre-ribbon Microsoft Office. I've also recently realised that if I replaced this computer, I'd probably end up with hardware without a barrel jack power connector. And on this laptop, if we swizz it round like that and open it up, we see that radically it has got two control keys rather than one control key and a Copilot key, which would drive me nuts every time I saw it. So I hope I'll be running Ubuntu 2604 on this hardware until at least some laptop manufacturers stop obeying Microsoft's edict to include a Copilot key. Due to Consumer ESUs, for many of us, the end of support for Windows 10 in October 2025 was pretty trivial. Basically, we just enrolled for ESUs and continued to use Windows 10 as we had previously. We still got security updates, and indeed, in some respects, things were better than they'd been previously because we didn't continue to get all of those other updates to Windows 10 we never wanted in the first place. But this time around, in October 2026, things are going to be different. It really is the end of support for Windows 10 Home and Windows 10 Pro. And so many of us now need to accept that the clock is now ticking towards the end of the era of Windows 10. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.